So within Suffolk, we like to share great examples of co-production that's happening. There's quite a lot of co-production activity happening within Suffolk, but what's your view on how we can kind of move that agenda of co-production a bit more forward amongst professionals? Maybe it might be taking more smaller steps, maybe with the more sort of bigger organisations. I don't know, what are your thoughts? How can we do it?
I just think that for health and care to work really well, you really need to understand your community and you really need to understand the people that you need to get to. So I think that any managers or any people who are thinking about doing co-production, I just think that they should go for it. And, it might be that you have to do it in little steps. It might be that you need to start by just inviting people to meetings. It's not just about them coming to us. Maybe the event, like, for instance, the Bangladeshi Women Association put on a day for mental health, and they invited all people across the NHS, SNEE, all of these people to come along to the event. And honestly, in fact, some of the people from Sharing Parenting came along because they were dealing with Muslim communities as well. And I learned so much from being a part of that. I learned more about their culture and about some of the taboo issues around mental health just from listening to Bangladeshi people themselves speaking. The frustrating bit of it was hearing about how it was very difficult for them to engage in services because of the language problems.
Okay.
But also the other side of what they did was they actually trained up some volunteers to go out and do research within their own community. So they designed a questionnaire, and rather than having, Joe Bloggs from the NHS turn up, it was somebody they knew from the mosque who turned up with the questionnaire, and they filled it in together. And we know that the Bangladeshi community have health outcomes that are different to for the host population, for the rest of the population. Diabetes, certainly through COVID, there were big issues for them. And so, if we hear and we talk to them and we listen to them, then we can make better policy. We can have better services. I know that, for instance, the African families in the UK, talking to these black men about their mental health, I know there were things that came up within that group that were really useful. And actually, I want someone from the powers to be at those meetings every time they happen.
And then when these things are coming up, like you said about the language barriers with the Bangladeshi communities, that is then kind of like the start of a great idea for co-production, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because you can say, well, let's work on improving that. Let's do it together.
Yeah. But I know I hate to keep going on about money, but the other thing is the funding that we've given these organisations is only for 2 years. We're in year 2, at the beginning of year 2, and I'm desperately thinking, how can we continue that funding? Because once they've done their survey and given us all the feedback, we still need to be able to address some of the issues that have come up, and that's going to go beyond the 2 years. So my worry is that we always have a short-term kind of approach to funding.
Co-production is about relationships.
Yes.
And you can't build relationships quickly and effectively and then actually implement the outcomes that everybody's come up with within 1, 2 or even 3 years sometimes. I think that there really is a change in the system that does need to happen to enable co-production to really take hold and really be as effective as it can be.
And I would always say to NHS managers and people like that who have got very secure jobs to think about what it must be like to work in a voluntary organisation where your funding is only agreed for 3 years. How can you pay your mortgage? How can you do all those things? And we all need to pay our mortgages, don't we? So.
And the idea with co-production is it's not a one-off exercise. The idea is it's that golden thread. It's continuous and goes through. And if you've got that end looming, that's
it's difficult. Absolutely. So I think we need to think a bit more about sharing the money as well as as well as everything else, because we've got the data. We know because we've got the data, and it's a bit like when I saw how many people with learning disabilities were affected by testicular cancer and breast cancer and other issues that the rest of the community really do. We've got to we're not going to sort that out in 2 years. We need it needs money and it needs attention.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about that work?
Which work?
With the learning disabilities and trying to raise awareness.
Yeah, it's not any particular work that I've done, but ACE Anglia, who do fantastic workshops with people with learning disability, with peer mentors. I've been along to a lot of their sessions, and we should be really kind of, that's gold dust. And voluntary organisations, I don't care what anybody else says, voluntary organisations are much better at the face-to-face contact with people, rather than, I keep saying the NHS, but, rather than these big kind of statutory corporate
kind of,
absolutely, they're much better at it. So we should kind of enhance it. We should take that and enhance that and use it, for the better, so that we can sort out some of these data issues, these issues which are clear in data that show that health inequalities are massive in this country.
But you do need both. You need the corporate side for the process, don't you? But then you need the voluntary organisations and the people.
Yeah.
They're your context, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That reminds me of the parable of the blobs and squares.
Yes.
You'd have to enlighten me there.
It's a great video which we will link in the bottom of the description.
Okay.
You must check it out.
It really shows that idea of that power sharing,
right,
in a really creative way. It's a great video.
Yeah, and it's difficult because for you to give more power to people means you losing power.
Exactly.
But you've got to look at the bigger picture,
yes.
And the bigger picture is health and well-being outcomes. And at the end of the day, none of these organisations can do that on their own.
No.
And in all fairness, if we look at the data, we have failed in a lot of areas.
And that's the great thing about co-production. You don't have to be the one that's coming up with all the solutions and all the answers and trying to fix everything on your own. You actually do it together as a group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully, the ICS and the ethos behind the ICS is that we do this together.
Yeah.
And there are going to be systems in place to make sure that people are listened to and that we hear the views of people with lived experience. And that we go out of our way to try and deal with some of the disparities that exist. There are really important figures, like if you come from a particular area, you're likely to die 20 years younger than if you come from another area. Yeah. I mean, this is within Suffolk. Within Suffolk, if you're from a certain part of Suffolk, your lifespan is less because you're living in that area and you're part of a community that's maybe not as wealthy as another area, and that's not good.
That's not fair.
To think you're knocking 10 years off people's lives just because they haven't got equality.